Countess Ada of Lovelace, pioneer of computer science. A chapter from How Old is Time? Short stories from science, history and philosophy by Sasho Dolence. Read by John Stubbs. Today he would have presented his findings at a press conference, but because the year was 1833, mathematician Charles Babbage threw a party for celebrated guests, at a salon as it was called then. Among the guests were respected aristocrats, artists, scientists, and indeed everyone who was anyone in London society at the time. The company included the young Ada Byron, who was very interested in technological novelties. Such salons featured dancing, music, poetry, and exotic food, but could also be an important source of information about the latest scientific discoveries. Guests played with mechanical dolls, gazed through telescopes, admired electric and magnetic phenomena, and listened to lectures by renowned experts. On this particular occasion, the centre of attention was Babbage's special mechanical computing machine. The apparatus consisted of an intricate mechanism of small interlaced wheels. Ada's mother was convinced it was some kind of a thinking thing, but Ada was sceptical. She thought that even though the machine was able to compute, this could hardly be considered the same as thinking. Ada was still young, but she was hardly a new face in high society. Her father was the famous poet George Noel Gordon Byron, known as Lord Byron. He, on the other hand, wasn't a big fan of technological progress. In the House of Lords, he had even publicly supported the Luddites, groups of outraged workers who had broken up factory machines out of fear that technology would deprive them of their jobs. Byron was known as a tempestuous romantic artist, admired and feared at the same time. He was a regular guest at parties, where he was usually the centre of attention. During one of these social events, a calm and well-educated girl caught his eye, though she didn't seem at all interested in him. 19-year-old Annabella Milbank at first refused the advances of this popular ladies' man, but after a year she gave in, and they married in January 1815. Annabella became pregnant a few months later. During her first visit to Byron's half-sister, Augusta, she learned that her marriage to the notorious romantic poet wasn't going to be an easy one. While all three of them were lying on a sofa, Byron shamelessly suggested that his wife and his sister both start kissing him at the same time. In December 1815, Annabella gave birth to their daughter Ada Augusta Byron, and the family didn't stay together long. After 5 weeks, Annabella took the child and went to live with her parents. This was the last time Byron ever saw his daughter. A few months later, he went abroad and never returned to England, while Annabel made sure that she got full custody of the child. She threatened her husband that she would publicly disclose his extramarital affairs if he didn't agree to a divorce on her terms. Byron spent the next few years writing and travelling around Europe with friends. Once, while sheltering from heavy rainfall in a villa by Lake Geneva with the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley and his wife Mary, he came up with the idea of telling horror stories. He wrote a vampire story, the first literary attempt in the genre, while Mary's story became a classic. She wrote a novel about Frankenstein, the scientist who creates an artificial human. Over the next few years, Byron travelled around Italy, had many affairs, but eventually grew bored of this lifestyle. He made a spur-of-the-moment decision to join the Greeks in their war for independence from the Ottoman Empire. Unfortunately, he became seriously ill before experiencing his first battle, and his condition worsened after his doctor tried bloodletting, a common medical practice at the time. Byron died in April 1824, and on his deathbed, almost with his last words, mentioned his then 8-year-old daughter Ada. He hadn't seen her since she was a few weeks old. Meanwhile, back home in England, Annabel made every effort to prevent her daughter Ada from following in her father's footsteps, She made sure Ada was educated by excellent home tutors, chiefly in maths and science. But despite her mother's efforts, Ada couldn't shake off something of a Byronic temperament. When still a teenager, she fell in love with her teacher and attempted to elope with him, but their plan failed. The teacher was fired, and Ada had to go back to her studies. While immersed in these, she became friends with Mary Somerville, one of the few British female scientists, who became her mentor. She sent books on maths to Ada and gave her problems to solve. They went to Babbage's salons together and participated in discussions he led on science and technology. Mary's son introduced Ada to his schoolmate, William King. She and William were married in 1835 and had 3 children. A distant relative of Ada's was Prime Minister at the time, and he used his influence with Queen Victoria to obtain a noble title for the newlyweds. William thus became Lord Lovelace, and Ada Lady Lovelace. After the marriage, Ada returned to her mathematical studies. She wanted Babbage to become her mentor, but he declined, and so Ada contacted Auguste de Morgan, the pioneer of symbolic logic. Meanwhile, Babbage had managed to acquire considerable financial backing from the state in order to construct his computing device. But he and the engineer he hired to build it experienced many difficulties. Besides their disagreements, the biggest problem was actually an idea how the design might be improved, which occurred to Babbage while the machine was already being assembled. In 1834, he found a way of making a programmable machine. Not long beforehand, a French weaver, Joseph-Marie Jacquard, invented a mechanical loom that used pasteboard cards with punched holes to weave patterns and designs automatically. By using Jacquard's cards, Babbage's analytical engine, as he named the device, changed the sequence of commands according to the results obtained from a previous operation, which is one of the main characteristics of computers. Unfortunately, the British government refused to offer Babbage any further support for his new project. He had received 2 small Battleworths worth of funding, while still failing to produce his device and justify the investment. In order to draw attention to his latest idea, Babbage accepted an invitation to give a lecture at a science congress in Italy. A young Italian military engineer named Federico Luigi Menabrea, who eventually became Prime Minister of Italy, wrote a comprehensive study in French about the analytical engine. Ada offered to translate it into English, and Babbage suggested that she add a few notes and clarifications. Ada took her job seriously and ended up writing an accompanying document that was twice as long as the main translated text. In her appendix, she predicted that the analytical engine could be used for much more than simple calculations, and that it would be able to perform other operations as long as it was fed relevant data, a principle similar to the way modern computers use digitalized texts, sounds, and images. She even wrote a program that enabled the engine to calculate the Bernoulli numbers. This is now regarded as the first published computer program, making Ada the first computer programmer, despite the fact that Babbage drafted many similar programs for the analytical engine in his personal notes, but never published them. After publishing her study in September 1843, Ada finally felt that she'd become a real scientist. But unfortunately, the project to construct the first analytical engine came to a halt. Ada suggested she and Babbage become business partners, but Babbage refused, and he never managed to attract investors on his own. He spent the last of his money and died in relative poverty. At his death in 1871, the analytical engine existed only on paper. It remained on the drawing board in spite of Ada's efforts, before Babbage died, to make it a reality. After publishing her paper, Ada started to gamble. It seems that she was trying to gain enough money to build the analytical machine herself, but without success. Instead of making a fortune, she ran up a giant debt. She developed uterine cancer and died in 1852. She was only 36. Her final wish was to be buried with her father, Lord Byron, whom she never met and who had died at the same early age. It was another 100 years before the first operational computing machine was built. Alan Turing, who built the first modern computer while trying to decode German military messages during World War II, read Ada's notes avidly and was fascinated by how much the young scientist had foreseen in the mid-19th century. Countess Ada of Lovelace, pioneer of computer science. A chapter from How Old is Time? Short Stories from Science, History and Philosophy by Sasho Dolence. Read by John Stubbs.